Now, laws are generally divided into several categories: adjudicatory, regulatory, and then within that, civil and criminal. Jurisdiction may include regulatory jurisdiction, which is taxation, zoning, the right to make laws, etc., or adjudicatory, which is infractions, crimes, the ability to hear a case. To establish adjudicatory jurisdiction, the adjudicatory power must have personal jurisdiction, territorial jurisdiction, and subject matter jurisdiction, which means that they must have jurisdiction over the individual person. The matter which is being discussed must be within their territory. They must have jurisdiction over the territory where the incident occurred. And they must have subject matter jurisdiction. This is one of the most important jurisdictions with respect to sovereignty, because subject matter jurisdiction means you must have laws governing what is being discussed. When we're dealing with jurisdiction, the framework within Indian country is there's tribal sovereignty, there's the trust relationship, there's civil jurisdiction and criminal jurisdiction, there's federal limitations on tribal jurisdiction, which may or may not be civil or criminal, and then there's also the issue of federal permission for states to assert jurisdiction over Indian country, which is often described as Public Law 280. Jurisdiction is the scope at which laws apply to persons, places, activities, etc. In this slide, you'll see that jurisdiction is broken into civil jurisdiction and criminal jurisdiction. For civil jurisdiction, there's the plaintiff versus the defendant, and it's usually an offense against a person, which results in fines or injunctions. Criminal jurisdiction, there's government versus the defendant for offense against the community, which usually includes prison, fines, and injunction. Because criminal jurisdiction usually entails a greater remedy, for example, prison, it has a higher standard of proof. Within both of these, there's the issue of civil regulatory and civil adjudicatory. And civil regulatory, as we've discussed, is the jurisdiction to make laws, and civil adjudicatory is the ability to hear those cases. When dealing with solid waste management, usually we deal with civil jurisdiction. There are some tribes that have criminalized open dumping, but generally civil jurisdiction is the mechanism used pertaining to solid waste management and open dumping. There are various cases and congressional statutes which have altered jurisdiction as well as the relationship between U.S. government and tribes. Many of those cases have divested tribes of criminal jurisdiction. An important case with respect to civil jurisdiction is Montana versus U.S., which was heard in 1981. In this case, a tribe passed a regulation on non-Indian activities and tried to have that statute apply on non-Indian owned reservation lands held in fee. So these were lands within the tribe's jurisdictional boundaries, but they were fee lands held by non-Indians. The Crow tribe was trying to issue a regulation that prohibited those non-Indians from hunting and fishing within the exterior boundaries of the reservation. The court in this case found that there was no congressional delegation of authority to the tribe to regulate non-Indians on non-Indian land within the reservation. And there was nothing that suggested that that non-Indian conduct of hunting and fishing threatened the tribe's political or economic security to justify tribal regulation. Out of this case comes what's known as the Montana test for determining whether a tribe has civil regulatory jurisdiction. This test asks two questions. One, is there a consensual relationship between the non-Indian and the tribe? This consensual relationship may include contracts, marriage, or other dealings where the non-Indian has essentially agreed to be subject to the jurisdiction of the tribe. The secondary question is, if there is no consensual relationship between the non-Indian and the tribe, does a non-Indian's activity, which is being regulated by the tribe, threaten or have a direct impact upon either the economic security, the political integrity, or the health, safety, and welfare of the tribe? Now, there have been further cases after U.S. v. Montana that address civil and regulatory jurisdiction. So in Strait v. A1 Contractors, that was in 1997, the court was addressing the jurisdiction of a tribal court over an action arising out of an auto accident involving non-Indians on a state highway right-of-way on the Fort Berthold Reservation in North Dakota. The court held that a tribe's adjudicatory jurisdiction did not exceed its legislative or regulatory jurisdiction, finding that subject to controlling provisions in treaties and statutes and the exceptions outlined in Montana v. U.S., the civil authority of Indian tribes and tribal courts did not exceed to the extent to the actions of non-tribal members on non-Indian fee lands. To answer the question on whether regulatory authority in Indian country, You must ask which government is asserting regulatory authority over whom and the type of landholding where the activity occurs within Indian country. Civil regulatory authority tests include tests on whether explicit federal delegation exists, and with respect to tribal sovereignty, the assumption is that the state regulatory laws do not apply in Indian country. This assumption was validated in Williams v. Lee and the Canons of Construction. There's also an assumption that there is tradition of tribal sovereign immunity or inherent self-government in specific areas of regulatory law. However, there may be a federal preemption of that inherent tribal sovereignty. Under the backdrop of tribal sovereignty, there are federal laws and statutes in the area of regulatory law that have divested tribes of authority, or federal permission has been given to states to apply state laws with respect to the area of regulatory law. What this provides is that there is an inherent tribal sovereignty that exists to regulate. That inherent tribal sovereignty has been either increased by explicit federal delegation. The feds have provided tribes with additional authority beyond their presumed tribal sovereignty, or there's been a federal preemption. So the federal government has limited tribal sovereignty, which we've seen in criminal matters in the Major Crimes Act. Another avenue is where the feds have given permission to the states to regulate within Indian country. One example of that is PL 280.